I think that's what a lot of people end up doing, right? Because there is so much FOMO and fad around this that people go out, trying to chase equity without cash flow. And so they sit on a lot of equity. But then when you go out and look at these people's investment portfolios, I always say that this is like a game of Jenga. You have to carefully remove pieces without the whole property portfolio collapsing because of 10,000 other things that they're doing at the same time, right? So it's a good segue. I think cash flow is the key and, passive income is the key. And so, thinking about adding a rooming house or an Airbnb or something along the lines, where you are adding significant amount of passive income into your property portfolio. So while it's pretty rich, it also helps you pay down your own debt faster. Hello and welcome to Help Me Buy Property podcast. And today we are going to talk about how to pay off your mortgage or your principal place of residence faster. Now, when you hear people say this, paying your loans or your mortgage faster, naturally people talk about decreasing interest rates or offset accounts or changing monthly to fortnightly payments or making extra payments or giving interest-only loans amiss, etc. But we are going to give a completely different perspective of how to pay off your mortgage faster. Now, before I open this topic more, let me introduce my co-host, drum roll, Cheryl. How are you today, Miss Cheryl?
I am amazing. Thank you, Moss. And obviously this gets asked all the time. Everyone goes, I need to pay off my mortgage. It's a 30-year loan. I don't want to be in my 60s when I pay it off. I want to be able, most people want to be able to do other things with their money.
100%.
So, and I feel that a lot of people are probably at the stage where they're like, interest rates are really high. I can't even imagine how I can pay off my PPOR quicker. So let's dive in and give people some really good strategies that they can take. And this is obviously all going to depend on their serviceability, the status of the house and so many things. But hopefully if we can give people some ideas, you can grasp at least, 1, 2, or 3 of them.
Definitely.
And you can always stack these things to be able to apply and pay off your PPOR.
And some of these strategies
quicker.
are so simple and easy to implement, right? A lot of people don't think strategically when you're thinking about paying down their loan or their mortgage faster, especially your principal place of residence. You hear people talk all the time that, buying a home is like, you're going to gym, you have to put in a lot of hard work before you see results and it's a 30-year strategy, blah, blah, yada, yada. I actually disagree. I say that, yes, there is weight loss methods out there. You don't have to, just go to gym in order to basically beautiful. So, and this is what this is about today, right? We are going to basically talk about the non-conventional ways of paying down the debt faster, right?
Yeah. Well, sure. Actually, when you mentioned non-conventional, I think people sort of go, oh my goodness, is this sort of a new age thing? I mean, the conventional thing, and probably one of the first simpler ones that most people can do fairly easily, is that, you might have a 30-year loan and it says you've got to pay off $5,000 a month, for example. But if you've got a bit of capacity, why don't you pay $5,500 a month? So you've got extra that goes into your principal, which reduces the amount of interest that you pay. Because at the end of the day, what we're trying to achieve here, and correct me if I'm wrong, Moxin, is that when you look at how much interest you're paying, it is, more than the actual cost of the whole property itself.
Yes.
And so the quicker that you can pay it off, that means you're saving yourself money.
100%.
That's a huge thing, So, and if you haven't seen what that looks like, go to one of those loan calculator things and you'll see how much you actually pay in interest. And that is scary because you've got to make sure that your property increases as much as the interest that you're paying to make it all worthwhile.
Yeah.
As well. So the simplest thing, I say, if you don't do anything else, even if it's $100 an extra a month, $200, like a little bit a month, never think that doesn't make a difference. It does. Little bits make a difference. So,
and I think you make a really important point. I think a lot of people who find money during the year, like bonuses and, people get money during the year or, they win a small lottery or whatever, right? Put it towards your principal place of residence. I think, that's one of the easiest way to basically pay down their debt. A lot of people that I also see is, they keep recasting their debt, right? So they recast their debt for 30 years. Yes, great for cash flow, but it takes you further away from paying down your debt, right? And so when you're recasting, make sure that, you're not going back to 30 years. You might be, you're trying to basically keep it down to that, paying it faster as much as you can. So I don't disagree, paying fortnightly versus monthly, making that extra repayment always definitely helps. But one of the things, and again, budgeting plays a really big part in a lot of these things too, right? Have a good budget in place. I was reading one of the statistics just yesterday, 70% more Australians are basically doing budgets right now because of the cost of living pressures. But they are not doing budgeting just for the cost of living. They are doing budgeting basically so that they can save more and invest harder. So that's where the market dynamics are changing quite actively. But one of the non-conventional ways is renovating, selling, and repeating. And so you see people basically doing that a lot these days in order to basically pay down your loans faster as well. How do you feel about that, Cheryl?
Yeah, I think it's a great strategy. And however, it's not for everyone, because not everyone is able to live in a house that's renovating, right? There's a whole lot of dust. And if you've got little people that are living in there as well, they're going to be running around in dust. Like, it doesn't work for everyone. And it can be very stressful, right? Particularly if you're working or whatever that might be. I remember when we did that, we renovated but we didn't have children at the time, right? But we were up till 1, 2 in the morning about to put hammers in each other's heads because you had to do it outside. So I think that if you have the ability to renovate and then sell it or even just keep it,
definitely,
right, then it's a fantastic way to manufacture equity.
When I did my renovations, typically what I did was I was still renting. And so I had an opportunity to buy a place, spend 6 weeks, 8 weeks renovating it fully, and then basically moving in. So, and the reason you would move in because you want to claim the principal place of residence capital gains tax exemption for you to basically go out and sell it again and not, get bitten by the tax. And so that's, I always feel that, because I've done it a few times now, it's always a great strategy where you buy with an intention to renovate. You know exactly what you're renovating. You come out, you sell very quickly in the first 6 to 12 months. And you're not trying to make $1 million out of a single sale, right? I think where a lot of people fail is, I'm going to do this renovations, and they get emotionally attached to this. And, they're trying to make the most out of a single renovation, and they get really disheartened when, they don't get the price. The idea is to flip and do it quickly. And the more you flip, the more you realize that, where do you need to add value in order to get the best results?
Yeah, absolutely. It's just be mindful from a tax perspective as well. If you are doing this 10 times, right, the tax office is going to go, whoa, wait a minute, is this in the business of renovating and selling? So, if you're doing it once or twice or whatever, just to be able to get yourself ahead.
100%.
It's quite 100%. Different to going, I'm in the business of this is what I'm doing every single year. And kudos to you if you're going to have the resilience and the patience to do that, then that's awesome. Let's just be mindful of that, because the tax office will look at it with the scrutiny
100%.
glasses.
And so similar strategy to this is basically buying a place, dropping it down, rebuilding it to a product market fit, and then living in it and selling it. And you see very similar strategy where people follow this, where it's not a pure development strategy, because you don't make 20% margin on cost in majority of these areas. But if you build a good enough or a high-end house, you could technically make walk away with $200,000-$300,000 quite easily. And again, same strategy that you're following, right?
Yeah. So I've got a neighbor, and they're not selling, but they could if they sold. They'd make a monster. But they bought property waterfront maybe about 15 years ago, but they just built quite a smallish house that they could afford at the time, but it was waterfront. And so 15 years later, they've literally done a huge renovation. And what would have been at the time that probably might have been valued at $2 million, they've done a big renovation, accessed the equity, and it's going to be valued at, I reckon, at least $4 million. And saying that, they've used the equity, they've had to rent out. They won't sell, but if they did, and they could, they've sort of gone, we might sell in a year or two, who knows? Then there's no CGT on that. They've got huge enough sort of equity uplift, but that's sort of a long-term plan, and it's something that you don't discount, particularly if you're wanting to buy in premium areas. If you buy a house in a great street, but you can only afford sort of a quite a modest house, then you just need to know that you've got a longer term plan with that.
And one of the sort of prerequisites to, renovation and build is the frustration bit, right? You need to almost assume that you would cause a lot of friction and frustration, be it your family moving it again and again, or you living through the trades. And, so, assume that is going to happen. Don't assume that it's going to be hunky-dory and you can rinse and repeat pretty much right away. It never happens typically, especially in these two strategies.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a whole lot of relationship.
Yes.
Not just the house, it's your family relationships. You've got to rent out. So a few other things that can be possible. It's just a little bit more logistics to manage.
And again, I think the most important point from a build and sell perspective is that while you're cashing out on capital gains tax, it's also the CGT side of things. If you do it carefully, again, this is not to be constituted as tax advisor, financial advice. Please go and speak to your financial advisor, financial planner, tax accountants. But it's an amazing way to basically bypass CGT and GST, right? Because brand new houses do attract GST on it. But if you live in it in itself as PPOR, then typically no GST. Whereas if you're renting, the 5-year rule still applies and you still have to pay GST if you sell it within the first 5 years. So
just be aware, speak to your accountant. Disclaimer.
Yes, 100%. Now, the third strategy that is the most common known strategy, right, is buy, hold, create equity, invest, and then sell and pay down the loan, right, and pay down your PPOR. And you hear a lot of buyers agents talk about this. You hear probably like 99% of investors who are out there, trying to create wealth for themselves, basically doing that. But you never see people selling because there is a massive capital gains tax attached to it, right? So even if you're sitting on $2 million worth of equity, that pay down only happens by the time you're retiring. It does not really happen when you are building this strategy. So there is, pros and cons to this side of the strategy. What do you think, Cheryl?
In terms of accessing the equity and investing, is that what you're... Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of people are quite equity rich, right? But they're cash poor. So, I think it's about finding the right sort of investment assets that are going to give you the cash flow, and it needs to be over and above what you're paying in your interest, right? So you've got interest and depreciation that you can take into account. So what that means is that if you've got the capacity to, as you're taking the equity out, you're investing in cash flow. Say, for example, you're getting, if you're looking at commercial properties or rooming houses or NDIS, whatever that might be, that income should pay off the interest and give you extra that then goes back into your principal as well, all offset. Like, if you want to reuse that money again, put it in an offset, not back in your principal. Otherwise, you're going to have to do a whole refinance.
Definitely. I think that's what a lot of people end up doing, right? Because there is so much FOMO and fad around this that people go out, trying to chase equity without cash flow. And so they sit on a lot of equity. But then when you go out and, look at these people's, investment portfolios, I always say that this is like a game of Jenga. You have to carefully remove pieces without the whole property portfolio collapsing, because of 10,000 other things that they're doing at the same time, right? So it's a good segue. I think cash flow is the key and, passive income is the key. And so thinking about, adding a rooming house or an Airbnb or something along the lines, where you're adding significant amount of passive income into your property portfolio. So while it's equity rich, it also helps you pay down your own debt faster.
Yeah, absolutely. So what are the other things, like if we've got the house and say we don't have the ability to renovate, say we don't have any more of serviceability, we're maxed out in serviceability. So a lot of people are, because they've borrowed so much, interest rates have gone up and they're like, I'm stuck. If they're absolutely stuck, what are some options that are not going to cost them more money and it's not going to input on their serviceability?
One of the easiest one, and I've seen this client, and again, you need to be flexible in doing this, is, renting out room in your own house as an Airbnb or a shared guest or something, right? And so especially like if your house is built up in such a way that there is an external access to a single bedroom, for example, then you could potentially, use that as an opportunity to make some extra income on the side. And yes, of course, it, exposes you to capital gains tax out of things. But if you're not really selling it ever, then, typically that is an amazing thing, or that, money would be amazing to basically pay down your debt quite fast. As you were saying at the start, an extra $500 to $1,000 a month in repayments basically shaves between 2 to 5 years from your debt, right? So you go from 30 to 25, right? So it can be really, really powerful. And that's one of the easiest strategies that people can implement right now if they are comfortable with people invading in their private space and, them giving them that opportunity to make that extra money.
Yeah. One of the smart things that I know more so like people who are in their early 20s or 30s when they don't have children, that it is, particularly when they've had rooming houses or similar or houses that they can rent out, is such a great way to have that income pay down debt. And it's, it doesn't require additional input from you apart from managing, right? So I think the point is here is always look at opportunities that you can leverage. You can car share, there are different ways that you can earn money to put money into your PPOR. Never feel that you're restricted to what you can just physically see in the stock standard.
I think one of the things that I saw recently that a client does, and that was an eye-opener for me as well, is everyone takes holidays every year, or majority of the people go on some sort of holidays every year, right? And so if you can rent out rooms or rent out a place or Airbnb while you're traveling, I think that could be significant amount of money. Like this particular person, they went away for almost a month and they cleared close to about $40,000 in that 1 month. Renting their place out, and that was amazing, right? I was like, wow, this is like wonderful. And because they were gone like between November, December, it's one of the peak times, and so you can charge a lot more premium. That's almost like half of your mortgage repayment, right, for a lot of people, right? So yeah, it's a really smart way to do it.
Yeah, and if you're building new as well, like consider how can I create a guest suite that allows you to almost cordon it off, and I've seen this done quite well. Like it all takes a bit of planning, but you can do this without it being incredibly expensive to you. It just takes a little bit more planning and thinking around.
Yeah. And you're not turning yourself into your house into a party house, right? You don't have to do that. You're just renting it out to a nice family or a big family, and your house, you could feel that you're living in an Airbnb all your year, right? You have that same sort of decoration and vibe. And so I thought that it was a wonderful idea. It was an amazing idea to basically pay down the debt a lot faster while helping you on the mortgage side of things.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's go to people who have a portfolio, for example, right? And then how do I, I've been able to grow a portfolio of investment properties, and it's giving me some income, but ultimately I want to be PPOR debt free, because not forgetting the debt in your PPOR is not good debt,
yes,
right?
Remember, lazy debt.
Robert Kiyosaki about good debt and lazy debt. It's lazy debt because you can't get any tax deductions and so on and so forth. Where investment properties or investments, you can. At what point do you sort of go, how can I leverage my investment properties to pay down my debt quicker?
So there are various ways to think about this, right? And so let's start off with the most easiest one. So the first and the foremost is every time a person has extra money, or extra disposable income, the first and the foremost thing that they do is either they pay down their debt, their principal place of residence, which is creating more lazy equity, right? Or they use that money to buy a new house, right? If your risk appetite sits somewhere in the middle where you're like, look, I don't want to buy a new house because, the interest rates are so high, and for example, but you don't want to create that lazy debt, what is the best scenario? In these circumstances, I always say to people that push that money into SMSF rather than paying down your debt. And there are two reasons to this. And let me explain this for viewers and listeners. And again, please don't constitute this as SMSF advice, or I'm not asking you to go out and set up an SMSF. Speak to your own advisor, speak to your own accountant, speak to an SMSF or financial advisor, and, seeking more information around this. But I'll tell you why I think about this. Now, your SMSF rates is capped at 15%, which means that, if you are sitting at 35 or 40% tax bracket, you're a high income earner, you are typically saving like 15 to 20% right away from your disposable income. For example, if you're saving, say, $10,000 as a net disposable income and your tax rate is, say, 30%, your gross income in this case is, $14,300, which means that the amount of money that you can put into super is actually $12,000 instead of $10,000 because of that less tax that you're going to pay. Or you can claim this back into your own tax returns as well. So you could do both years, right? And so this extra money that you're paying, this $2,138 that you're paying, would save you 3 years and 8 months on a $500,000 loan. Just this extra $2,000 payment, right? And you're not doing anything different yet. All you're doing is you're taking this $10,000 and taking it out of your pre-tax and putting it towards your super, right? And a lot of people don't naturally think about this. Now, what is the second reason that you would do this? The second reason you would do this, that you putting in this money into your super basically means that this money can be your deposit towards an investment property that you're going to acquire in your SMSF, right? And so that gives you an opportunity to still build a scalable property portfolio and catch that equity growth. And so while you're saving on these tax, while you're making this, you're getting a double benefit, right? It's a no-brainer for people who don't have a risk appetite to buy right now, but they're building that deposit. Build a deposit in SMSF. Why build a deposit in your disposable income on the side? So I find it really, really interesting that, it's such a low-hanging fruit and a lot of people don't tend to do it, especially earlier in their life. You see a lot of 50 and 55-year-old plus people doing it. But when you're in your 30s or 20s, you don't really, engage into some of these investment strategies.
Yeah. And I feel because a lot of people think, well, I can't, does that mean I can't access my funds then? Or, obviously it needs to be done through an SMSF. So they might not generally have enough of the funds in there. But if you do, I guess the question is, and this is something is to get clear from your advisor, what funds, when the funds are in SMSF, obviously you can't get it at the end until
true.
retirement.
But if you are building an asset base for yourself, if you're building a profile or invested assets or your property portfolio, you're not going to touch it. You're in this on the long game anyway. You're thinking about 10, 15 years anyway, right? And so I don't understand what's the benefit of building a portfolio under your name versus SMSF, where you're de-risking yourself doing it in SMSF versus your name, right? So I understand that people can use that money to bring it back and go into various different exit strategies. And I'm not portraying that only do SMSF, don't do it in your own personal name. Of course, you need to find that right balance. But what I'm saying also is that, if you're only saving $10,000 a month, a year, for example, and you are far away from making that deposit and you have to save this deposit for say 5 years or 6 years, do it in SMSF, right? There's nothing stopping you from doing that, because then the opportunity to grow within your SMSF profile would be a lot more faster and harder.
And does that mean then, for those who are looking to pay off their PPOR, how does the funds then impact their PPOR? Or is it just a long-term strategy thing that sits over there, but you still need to grow your portfolio outside of the SMSF to be able to physically get access?
It's definitely a long-term strategy. So it's, yes, on a day-to-day basis, you might not see a loan balance going down. But from a net wealth perspective, anytime you cash out your SMSF when you reach your reservation age, you would know that money is there basically to, pay off your debt faster. So yes, it does not help you from a cash flow perspective, but it definitely helps you from a net wealth perspective where, typically that money is there for you to pay down your debt if you really wanted to when you're ready.
And what this really highlights is that you actually need to sit down and cash flow this out and plan it out and come up with a strategy, to be able to go, well, if I want to pay down my debt, when do I want to do that, right? Am I going to be able to access my SMSF in 20 years, or is it 5 years, or is it 10 years, and if it's 10 years, then you sort of go, okay, well, that's sort of when I want to pay off my debt anyhow, and I can access the funds and so on. So it's if you don't have the skills and knowledge to do that, I think it's really important to sit down with the people who do and get the right sort of advice. I always say, bring in your accountant, bring in your broker, bring in your property advisor, all of them into one room so that they're talking the same.
Definitely.
And you know that you're heading in the right direction of where.
Now that I contemplate this thing through, and this is just me thinking out loud now, when you're thinking about paying down your principal place of residence, ultimately what you're doing is you're creating more lazy equity for yourself, right? And so what you would be doing with that lazy equity is basically use that money to reinvest and buy more property so that you can build up a scalable and a sustainable property portfolio, right? And so ultimately that's what the need and the requirement is. But for people who have build their property portfolios in their personal profile and do not have the servicing, but they have a good financial discipline and they can save an extra $10,000 a year, or 15,000 or 20,000, I say to them, save that in SMSF, because now what you're doing is you are saving an extra 15% on top automatically because you're on a high tax bracket anyway. Plus, you have a line of servicing available in SMSF right now because, SMSF servicing and your personal profile and your tax basically runs parallel to one another. So when you're stuck in your property portfolio, what's the point of paying down the debt? Because you don't have the servicing available to use the debt anyway, right? And so think logically about some of these things and understand, especially from an SMSF perspective, that you can almost go back and claim some of those money in the older years as well. So it's not just about saving for this year. You can claim, $20,000 from last year and the year before, and you can basically defer it and claim it in one go as well. So if you end up finding a lot of money, or someone gives you that money, or if you get a really handsome deposit or a handsome bonus of $50,000 or $40,000, use this strategy. It's an amazing strategy to basically explore, rather than just putting in an offset account, because that's what a lot of people end up doing. While that strategy is great, you can put that money in an offset account to reduce the interest rate on your principal place of residence, but typically a smarter way to do it would be.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. One of the things I want to bring up, and this is a practical thing more than in terms of credit cards and loans and so on. We see a lot of people with credit cards and car loans and everything like that. Well, one of the things is try to not have credit cards to begin with. If you've got a huge credit card debt, then pay that down as quickly as possible. But what are your thoughts around actually consolidating debt into your PPOR? Because, car loan debt can be, I don't know what the car loan debt, credit card debt can be like 18%.
Yes. I think that's an amazing idea. Again, from my perspective is this, right? And this is, I'm going to say something which is going to break a lot of stereotypes for people, right? So people who consolidate debt, what they do is they have a credit card which is owing them, say, $20,000, and they are paying 18% interest on it. And they consolidate that into their home loan, and then they let it pay over the next 30 years, right? That's a really stupid and a silly way to do it, right? From your perspective, what you need to do is you need to commit to paying this off. And so if the credit card is charging you, say, $2,000 a month, you commit to making that payment, and you consolidate to a 6% loan, but you still pay down faster. Set it up as a separate loan and still pay down faster. Don't just assume that because the loan is consolidated over 30 years, you'll pay it over 30 years. That's not the idea. The idea of consolidating the loan and setting it separate is you keep the repayments the same, but you bring the interest rate down so that holistically you pay less. If you consolidate and pay it over 30 years, you're actually paying more money, not less money.
Yeah, absolutely. It sounds like you from a monthly perspective, it sounds like it's only a small amount, but you're actually paying a lot.
And so that's where I see a lot of people making big mistakes, right? They'll consolidate, which is a great way to manage cash flow and creating and maintaining lifestyles. But what they also do is they don't commit to the same amount of repayments that they were making to a credit card company or a car loan company. They basically bring their repayments down to whatever the bank is now asking them to pay. And so while they were paying, say, $3,000 a month to a credit card company or a car loan, they go right down to $500 because they can. I'm like, well, hello, you still have to pay $3,000 because the idea is to pay down faster. The idea is not to bring this money into disposable income and spend it.
Yeah, absolutely. So look at your credit cards, look at consolidating your debt, get rid of credit cards if you just can't handle it.
If you can't handle the money, like 100%, right?
Yeah, if you're not paying your whole balance off, if you're not using it for points or whatever, like it's just makes you feel like you're unstoppable.
100%. I think
have no credit cards. It's not great for your credit scoring anyhow, like serviceability. They sort of see how much credit card. Maybe have a $2,000 credit card just in case.
Hits.
Right? Just in case, but don't go crazy.
I think there are two things in the property investment world, or two ideas or two strategies that are abused significantly in the property investment world. One of them that we have talked about is typically around, consolidating debt, and people think consolidating debt is managing cash flow. It's not so much about managing cash flow. It's actually about reducing the debt and paying it faster. The second one is using offset accounts. And so there is this notion around, hey, do all the savings in an offset account and it's great. Naturally it makes a lot more sense, right? If you think from a rational perspective, For every dollar that I'm going to save in an offset account, I'm going to offset the interest. Amazing concept. But people who use offset account as their operating account, they always overdo it. They always double dip into it, right? And so what they end up doing is, instead of saving more, they start taking more money out. And so what you see is, you lose that sight of, okay, how much is actually saving or genuine saving versus how much is operational expenses. I always say to people, when you're doing the budgets, your offset account should be an account where you don't have a debit card attached to it. You don't have access to that account through online banking. You have to actually go to the bank to basically get that money to the offset account and then use that account, because then that account is a powerful account. If you're pushing the salary in and out and using it as your day-to-day operating account, you would actually be a lot more worse from a budgeting perspective, because you lose sight of what is going in and coming out.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's start to bring this home a bit, Moss. I know that there's some really good benefits for people in the healthcare profession, and rightfully so, because doctors, nurses, anyone in healthcare, AMBOs, they do amazing things for our community. I'm not familiar with them, so I'd like to find out more, and I think a lot of our audience in that space would really like to know what they are.
People in healthcare and not-for-profit, they have, a salary sacrifice option where they can actually pay a mortgage from their pre-tax dollars. This is one of the benefits that they get being in healthcare industry and not-for-profit organizations. And a lot of people don't know this, because your organization might not be offering this salary sacrifice opportunity to you. So you can pay almost up to $15,000 off your mortgage repayment from pre-tax dollars, which is quite amazing, right? Because what you're doing is you're basically reducing your debt down by almost 2.5 to 3 years by potentially making an extra, 1 or 2 payments in the full year. And all you're doing is just same money. It's the same, yellow and green bills and, red bills, but it's just coming out of your pre-tax income. And so it's a free benefit that is available to a lot of people that, they don't use. And naturally, a lot of healthcare professionals, because they are a high income earners, they don't feel the need to use it. But I always say this, it's free money on the table. Why would you not use it? If you want to use it and give it out in charity, do that, rather than not using this benefit at all.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we've gone through a lot of strategies here. I think there is plenty for people to choose from. And don't settle for status quo. You don't have to do the 30-year thing. It doesn't benefit anyone else except the banks.
100%.
All right. It used to be 20 years. It's gone up to 30 years. They'll probably have 40-year loans. Again, it's just additional interest you are paying. So the quicker you can pay it off, even better.
Golden words.
Moss, did you have any
No
final
golden
words?
I think, Cheryl, I think it makes a lot more sense. If you have any of your strategies that we haven't talked about today, feel free